form. So we're going to be doing that by setting up our materials and leaving them for a few days to see what happens. We're going to create a salt solution and let it go and see if we can find out how exactly crystals form. But before we start, we're going to look at some salt and make some observations. And we've been talking a lot about observations and using our observation skills a lot in science class lately, so we are going to do some more practicing of that. I am going to show you this picture and we are going to see what you notice or observe. So what do you notice about this picture?
There's a white crystalline substance in a bowl with a scoop.
Yeah, what do you think that substance is?
Salt.
Salt. What do you notice about the salt? Is it small, large?
It's small, looks like it's misshaped, so everyone's different shapes.
Yeah. Okay, so we are going to look at another picture that's a little bit more zoomed in. How do your observations of this picture from the first picture change? What do you notice about this salt?
Well...
Or if they're the same, you can tell me observations that are similar.
Well, they're still the misshape and formed, and there's still crystals. And
do their color change at all? Do you notice anything about their color? Are they a solid color or is it more opaque?
They're a clearer color.
It's more of a clear color. Okay, anything else that you notice that's different? Nope, maybe just that there's less of them, not in a big pile. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a picture. This is a picture that was done, this is under a high-tech microscope. So what do you notice about this? This really changes how the salt looks, doesn't it?
Yes, it's cubes, they look gray. Really interesting.
Does the texture look a lot different?
Yes.
Yeah, because in the last picture you said it was clear. Now is this clear? Can you see through the object now?
No, it's gray.
No, it's gray. And I think that's probably just the technology they used for this, but that's all right. But it's still a lot different, right? So it kind of changes our view of what we think of salt. Okay, so before we get started, now that we've done some observations and we have gotten some knowledge about that or kind of talked it over, we would watch a BrainPop video about crystals just to get some background knowledge for us. But because of the time, we're not going to watch it for this specific lesson with you today, but we would have watched that. And then now we're going to look at our KWL chart. So as you remember, or should remember, a KWL chart is K is what you already know, W is what you want to know, and the L is what you have learned after our experiment. So in the K column, what are some things you already know about salt?
They're white, salty, well, it tastes like salt. It's very small and it's squarish.
Okay, so what were some questions or some things that you wanted to find out or want to know while we're doing the experiment, and hopefully we'll answer when we're finished?
How they form, how long does it take to form, what are crystals called when they're salt?
Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to give you the materials to do the project and you will set up your experiment.
Alright, so today we're going to be looking at this, we're going to be exploring this test that I'm going to do with Melissa here, my student. We're going to be mixing up a salt solution and putting a string in it and seeing what it looks like after a couple days. So first we're going to grab a jar lid, a tablespoon of salt, mix the salt in with the water, let it sit there for a while, and then we'll pour it into the jar lid and put the string in there and see what it looks like. So I'm going to let her do that first. She's going to put in the salt in the water mixture, and then she's going to dump it in.
A tablespoon?
Yep, a tablespoon. Doing great. Alright, and then she's going to mix that together. That was in there. Mix it up real good. Okay, so that's going to sit there for a couple minutes, but while that does that, I'm going to have her fill out this KWL chart, the first part of it. So it looks like this, if you can kind of see it. I'll take a picture of it too. But the K says what she knows. So it'll be the part that she knows about salts and maybe crystals. So she can write down anything she knows about salt and crystals and that part while the mixture is going. And then once the mixture is kind of settled, then we will come back and show you what we're doing.
Okay, so after we let our experiment sit for a few days, do we notice that something has changed about our lid?
There's salt crystals on the top of it.
Oh, you noticed there's some salt crystals. So what about the water? Our water isn't quite gone, but what happened? What is something you told me earlier that you looked like before we got going?
It evaporated.
It evaporated. So what does that kind of tell us about how these crystals started to form?
It happens when it evaporates.
So yeah, when the water is evaporating, it looks like it's leaving something behind, right? So because our string is still in the water, we didn't necessarily get a lot of crystals on it, but where it is out of the water, where it did evaporate, do you notice anything?
There's a little bit on right there where it got was in the water.
And then it evaporated out? Yeah, so there are some crystals left on that part of the string. So I'm going to have you, earlier we drew a picture when we set up our experiment a couple days ago. You drew a picture of what the lid looked like before we let it sit. So you drew a picture of the lid just by itself with the water and the string in it. Now I want you to draw a picture of what it looks like afterwards. So draw a picture of those crystals you told me about, and maybe a little crystal on your string on the end there. If you want to, you're more than welcome to pick up the string, look at it, make sure there's no other crystals on there, look at the lid, experiment with it, kind of check it out, get all the angles so you can draw a quick picture. So go ahead and do that. So are you noticing anything different when you're taking out the string? Is there anything on it, or is it just wet?
It's just wet.
Okay, but there's that one big crystal on the end where it did evaporate?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you just want to draw a picture of that. Awesome. Okay, so next to that great picture you drew, I want you to draw or write out some observations of the different lids. What does this lid look like versus the lid that you drew? I mean, what changed? Write down your observations. We'll put this in your science notebook. So write down your observations of what you see happening.
Of what it previously looked like?
What's different. So from the previous lid, now write the differences
Oh, okay.
on this lid. Now what's there? So you told me there's crystals, there's a crystal on the string, water evaporated. Those are the kind of things that I want you to write down for your science notebook for your observations. Good job. It looks like you have some really good observations written down. Do you feel like, before we move on into our group discussion, do you feel like you got to answer some of the questions that you asked on your what you want to know on your KWL chart?
Yes.
Awesome. All right.
All right, so I let her do that. So we're gonna come back here and we're gonna pour some of this water with the salt that dissolved in it into the little lid that I have here, and she'll do that for you. That's okay. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna have her put in the string. All right, and then that's gonna sit there, but just from observing it right now, I mean, it looks like the water cleared up in the glass here, but she wrote down some of our things that we looked at, such as what did the salt look like before we put it in the water, what happened to the salt once we stirred it into the water, and just any other observations that we had. So from her science journal, she wrote down a couple things. We can show up here. I can show it for you. So she put on the top here, before I put the salt in the water, the particles of the salt were small and white, crystal-like. And the salt seemed at first that it didn't want to dissolve. After a few minutes, the salt started to dissolve into the water, making the water a cloudy color. So I will take a picture of that, and so that we can see it later too. And that is it for that part.
Okay, so in science, sometimes we do further exploration of our experiments. So today we're going to write down some questions that we maybe want to know, or we kind of drummed up while we were doing our experiment. We got excited, we thought of other questions that we could research because of the experiment that we did. You did tell me earlier, we did answer some of the questions on your KWL chart. We found out that when a crystal that is salt forms, it's called halite. And what happens how do they form? Can you tell me that? Do you remember what we talked about earlier?
They form when the water evaporates and the salt minerals are what makes the crystal.
Yeah, so when the water evaporates, it creates halite because the mineral is halite stays behind after the evaporation of salt. So today we're going to do a little bit of an elaboration of our project, and we are going to do some further research. So we'll write down some questions that we want to research. We'll sort them out on the wall. Each of our students will give us a question to put up there. We'll kind of sort them in likeness of maybe you and someone else want to know what some other crystals are, or what other mineral crystals we can find. And then we'll put those similar questions and we'll research them all together and try to answer as many as we can. So what we would do when we research them is we'll take some notes together, we would research on our iPads and get all the information collected that we would need. So we'll go ahead and write down some questions that you can think of from our experiment today. And then we'll put them up on the wall. So you used a good question. What other types of mineral crystals are there? So I think that's going to be a common question that is asked. So maybe that's one that we would research. And to finish up our lesson, we will go into what we're going to finish with our KWL chart.